Good morning. Welcome to EduSat Network. Friend, you know this week we have organized a series of lecture on social work, and today the particular topic is research in social work. This is a method of social work and it has great relevance in evolving the knowledge for application to social work practices. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Neera Agnimitra. She is currently Associate Professor in Department of Social Work in the University and has done a number of work in the area of social work and research work in the area of her main contribution in the area of education, health, disaster, and several other related to this disaster and ecological things. And a number of books has been published, and a number of publication and the report article has been published in different national and international journals. And Dr. Agnimitra has also taken several important assignment evaluation work for national and international organization on the area on the several issues of social work, and she has done a lot of work in the ecological and disaster management. So I think her knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic, and will also give a kind of insight and guidance how the research in social work is different from the other streams. So certainly we are going to get a kind of information regarding the research in social work. So on your behalf, I welcome her for the EduSat lecture on this very topic. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Amrin's-ji. As you have very rightly mentioned, research is a very important method of social work practice. It is one of the core methods, and the relevance of research cannot be undermined. You see, in social work, there are two primary purposes why we emphasize research. One is that our students and practitioners are producers of research. And the second thing is that, you know, more than being, not every social work practitioner may become a producer of research, but we also teach research and research methodology to enable them to use research appropriately. So both as producers and consumers of research, you know, both of these roles they perform, and that is why we update them with research methodology and this very basic course on research in social work. Now, before I start, I'd just like to mention that, you see, research in the whole domain of social work is a very vast theme. I will just be presenting an overview of research, because in itself I think there can be a series of lectures on research in social work, so probably we can attempt that sometimes later, but an overview of research is what I shall attempt to provide. Now, before I begin with social work research, just a brief recapitulation on what is research. So if we try and define research, you see, as the name suggests, research is re and search. So research, there is a search which is hidden in research. Basically, research is the search for new knowledge, search for new facts, and it can be undertaken in any branch of knowledge, any discipline. What distinguishes research from any random meandering is the fact that research by nature is a careful investigation. It is a systematic investigation. It is a structured inquiry or investigation. There are two things which research proposes to do. One, of course, is add on to the body of knowledge. At any point of time, there is a corpus of knowledge which exists, and research endeavors try and establish new facts. They try and replace the redundant knowledge that is there. They validate the existing knowledge, substantiate, supplement knowledge, and also update knowledge. So one is, of course, this very primary function of knowledge generation, knowledge creation. From the perspective of social work, knowledge building definitely is very important, but what is important is that this knowledge that is built is supposed to be for practice augmentation, right? So that is where we differentiate between two basic domains of research. One is pure research and one is applied research. So maybe in a subject like sociology, you would have pure research. You would maybe want to understand the whole phenomenon of juvenile delinquency, you know, the causes, the reasons, the etiology, etc. But when we do research in social work, it may again be premised in juvenile delinquency, but the whole focus is not really so much on understanding juvenile delinquency as it is on understanding juvenile delinquency for the purpose of maybe creating interventions to prevent, to arrest, to mitigate juvenile delinquency. So that is the difference between any other discipline and research that we undertake in social work. Now, if we further look at knowledge creation, then knowledge can be created, or if I ask you a question, how do we come to know? How do we know? What is the basis of our knowing? Primarily, the basis of our knowing is, number one, we know because we have some kind of an experience, right? So we have a personal experience which enables us to know. We may also have a basis in tradition. For example, tradition says so. So we know something because traditionally we know that this is what it is. For example, in the domain of social work, any organization has an accumulated practice wisdom. So when you go and work for that organization, they say that these are the interventions that we have tried out. These are traditionally the interventions which work, and so we naturally go and apply these interventions. So one is traditional, that's something that already exists, and that becomes kind of a source of knowledge for us. The third thing is common sense. A lot of times we work or we know because we think it is commonsensical. So for example, in the past people thought that the earth was flat, right? And that was just common sense because they could not see the curvature of the earth. Or, we could just assume that because heterosexuality is normal, homosexuality is abnormal. So these are things, and it is very dangerous to tread, in social work, to tread on the basis of common sense, which is something that practitioners are tempted to do. The other source of knowledge is, knowledge emanating out of authority or experts. So we have an expert saying something, for example, a doctor says something and you believe that, or you take that as knowledge. Or, one very dangerous example could be, how advertising industry uses celebrities to endorse products. So if a sportsperson says that a particular sports drink is good for health, or a particular breakfast cereal is good for health, then you would take that as the basis of knowing and even application. So, of course, popular media also plays a role in knowing. So you have television and you have the internet. Internet, in fact, is a very big threat to knowing, because I would just like to give the example of Wikipedia, which is the online encyclopedia, which anybody and everybody is encouraged to edit and to contribute to that. So you can understand how a lot of knowledge may be erroneous knowledge, but it circulates as knowledge. So these are all the different sources of knowledge. But there is a lot of hazard, in following all of these sources of knowledge. What is the option that we have? The option that we have, or the alternative to knowing, is scientific inquiry. Scientific inquiry helps us to safeguard against all these potential dangers of relying on, what I've just mentioned, relying on knowledge which stems out of tradition, authority, common sense, popular media. And this is more so in the domain of social work practice. It guides social work practice. It also helps to safeguard against errors which we may make when we attempt to build wisdom through our own practice experiences and unsystematic observations. I just said that a lot of times, if we've had a personal experience, we think that that is normal, that is normative, right? And therefore, we kind of assume that and we generalize that, right? And therefore, it helps us to guide so that we don't assume that our own practical experiences can provide basis for generalization. Thirdly, it involves critical thinking, so that we can spot fallacies in what others may tell us about their practice wisdom or about their interventions. So this method of knowing, which is scientific inquiry, is the most feasible and the most reliable method of knowledge generation. What is scientific method? Now, scientific method has certain characteristics, many characteristics, but I've just opted for a few very important characteristics which define scientific method. First is that the scientific method is open to questioning. It assumes that knowledge can always be challenged, it can be contested, it is tentative, it can be refuted, right? That is the first characteristic. Secondly, Scientific method assumes that there is verifiable evidence that we need to gather. Verifiable evidence meaning that evidence is based on observations which other observers can also see, they can also check, and that forms the basis for knowledge. Thirdly, the scientific method focuses on accuracy. In other words, it describes what really is, what really exists. It describes things as they are and not as we wish them to be, or as we want them to be, or as we imagine them to be. The fourth characteristic of scientific research is that there is an element of, a very great element of systematization. That means the entire process of research has to be systematic and it has to be reliable so that we draw reliable, verifiable conclusions. The other objective is the pursuit of objectivity. You see, again, let us understand that in the social domain, a total objectivity is impossible to attain. All of us as researchers have our own personal biases, prejudices, there may be vested interests which also operate in the domain of research. When I say pursuit of objectivity, it means that you see whatever procedures we use in research work, especially social research work, should be scrutinized and scrutinized very, very thoroughly for potential bias and vested interests with the aim of minimizing researcher bias. That means that we all will have bias, but once we acknowledge our bias, we will be in a position to minimize bias and to ensure that bias does not percolate to the extent that it will if we do not acknowledge it. The next important characteristic is of course replication. Replication means that when we repeat the study or any other researcher repeats the study, you get same or similar conclusions. So duplicating a study to ensure that the same evidence or the same conclusions are drawn also adds to the reliability of results. And the last characteristic is controlling conditions. Now in pure science, natural science, physical science, control is very easy to achieve because most of the research work is done in laboratories. In laboratories, it is very easy to, for example, control, you see, other variables like you can control temperature and humidity and pressure and noise, etc. But the research work that we do in the domain of social work and even social research for that matter, controlling conditions are difficult to achieve. Because you see the research work is undertaken in the human laboratory. So you would do research work outside in a community or in an organization. There it is very difficult to establish control. For example, I'll just take a simple example that I go to a community and I wish to undertake a small research work, let's say on women and their health, and I find that in the community the day I go there is a death in the community or there is an instance of violence in the community. I will not be in a position to then proceed with my research work. That means controlling conditions, controlling all the variables except the independent variable becomes difficult, but still the attempt is to create as much of a control as is possible. Of course, controlling conditions, this particular characteristic is much more applicable in experimental research. Now, what are the characteristics of research? Nothing much to add here except that the kind of research work in social work research is controlled when we are testing causal relationships. It is of course in social science research and in social work research, it cannot be achieved to the extent that it can in physical sciences. It is rigorous, it is systematic, it is valid and verifiable, empirical and critical. Now, within the domain of social research, what are the objectives of research? There are primarily 4 objectives of research. One is, of course, that we want to get familiar with newer phenomena. We want new insights about things, about concepts, about situations, about phenomena which have been relatively unexplored. So there is a whole category of research studies which we label as exploratory studies or formulative research studies. which cover this particular type of research. The second characteristic of research in our domain is descriptive research. The intent of this kind of research is to portray very accurately or to describe the characteristics of a situation or a phenomena or a concept or an individual, a group, a community or a category. This, like I said, is descriptive research, and it has a definite, distinct research design that is followed. The third type of research, which is again based on a particular objective of research, is that research where we want to determine the frequency with which something occurs, or the frequency with which something is associated with something else. This particular objective then is catered to by a whole category of research work or research study, which is known as diagnostic research study. The fourth research objective is where we want to look at causal relationships, that A causes B. So if we want to look at causal relationship between variables, then we have a category of research work which is known as the hypothesis testing research study. So these are, apart from this, of course, in the domain of social work, we have a whole category of other researches. We have action research and we have evaluation research, etc., which will come a little later. Then let's look at social research before we proceed with social work research, because social research is a distinct category in itself. It is different from pure research in the domain of physical sciences and natural sciences. Although you see the aim or the intent of this research is the same, like pure and like natural and physical science approach, it also proposes to establish, to measure, to analyze and to predict associations in the social world. Right here, what we are trying to cover is the social world as against the natural or the physical world. What are the objectives of social research? What are the objects of social research? The objects of social research are active human beings, and that is why I said earlier that social research is undertaken in real life settings. So we say that our labs are human labs, and that is why there is a great deal of sensitivity which is associated with research in the domain of social work and overall in the domain of social science. It is concerned with social data. Definitely, as compared to data in sciences, in natural and physical sciences, social data is more complex to gather. It is much more complex to analyze. Objective approach, like I said, is limited because the scope for bias to come in is more. And like I said, acknowledging bias is the most important, insight that we have gathered in the domain of research today. Difficulty in establishing causal relationships. This happens because you see there is multiple causation. Unlike physics where A can lead to B, in social research there is multiple causation, multiple variables impact one dependent variable, and it is very difficult therefore to segregate the impact of different variables on the dependent variables. We say that there is one independent variable and there is one dependent variable, and we have to look at the relationship between these two. But apart from this one independent variable, multiple variables are there which are impacting the dependent variable. The other variables are known as the extraneous variables, and it is difficult to segregate the impact of the extraneous variables in order to say that A causes B. Again, the subject matter of social research is also qualitative, and therefore it requires specialized research designs and research methodologies. Now, let's come to social work research. Social work research is primarily the application of research methods to the production of knowledge which social workers can use. Like I said, it is applied research. So any research which is done with the intent of application, which is done with the intent of solving problems, which is done with the intent of evolving interventions which are effective interventions, which are efficacious interventions, which are also, also testing and evaluating interventions. Any kind of research which is done in order to facilitate the capacity of individuals and organizations to work towards the objectives of the social work practitioners. All that will come in the domain of social work research. Now, so we can also define, if I can just read out a definition, a very comprehensive definition of social work research, then I can say that social work research is the systematic use of research concepts, methods, techniques and strategies to produce knowledge related to the objectives of social work programs and practices. It uses the same scientific methods and techniques as social research. It typically focuses on the assessment of practitioners' work with individuals, groups, families, communities, or appraisal of agencies or programs that involve the continued efforts of practitioners with the many clients, client systems, and action systems. So this very distinctly tells us how, as compared and as contrasted to social research, social work research is always, it either results in action or it emanates out of action. So there's always a practice, an application or an action component which will distinguish social work research from any other category of research. Now, what are the multiple range of objectives that we set for social work research? Of course, there are many, but the four main objectives would be, number one, as I already mentioned, we constantly need to evaluate our interventions, our methodologies, and constantly need to see how effective they are in terms of, ameliorating problems, improving the well-being, etc. of our client and client groups. So for this, this is one major objective for which social work research is undertaken. Second, of course, for enhancing theory and knowledge about problems, policies and practice. This is a very important objective for social work research because we constantly need to upgrade our knowledge. You see, we derive a lot of theory from associated disciplines. Social work borrows heavily from sociology, anthropology, economics, multiple disciplines. And we also have our own corpus, of knowledge. So we constantly need to enhance and update knowledge so that we are able to augment our practice. Thirdly, we want to highlight and advance the quality of the lived experience of our action systems. We want to enhance and update our practical wisdom. We want to also increase our personal and organizational learning, and therefore we rely on social work research. Lastly, of course, our vision, our mission, our goals of social work practice are all rooted, grounded in the goals of social inclusion, social change, social justice, empowerment, and in order to facilitate all of these, social work research proves to be a very effective method. Now, social work research, therefore, in social work research, research will not end just with the completion of a report or with, writing of an article, as it would in maybe other categories of research. Here, social work research will ultimately work towards empowering the service users, our constituencies, our communities with which we work. The uses, so what is important is the use to which our research is put, the impact of this research. That therefore, dissemination of research becomes a very, very important component in social work research. There is a great relationship between social work research, the result dissemination and practice. Potential outcomes in terms of service user benefit, change in policy, practice, etc. also emanates out of social work research. It is important to see, this one line is very important. Every research study will leave a footprint of some kind. So it will impact somebody, even if it is just the participants of the study in a very narrow perspective, from the entire society. So it has a footprint, it has an impact, and it has a use. There is also an interactive relationship between academic inquiry and practice. We say that there is a praxis, that theory leads to practice and practice leads back to theory building. So, social work research is built on this very interactive relationship between academic inquiry and practice. Now, if we look at the social work research process in a very, very simplistic manner, then we can say that it begins, it begins with the identification of a problem or problems, whether it is with a client, with a group, a community, that depends on the level of social work intervention, needs assessment. Based on that, we select a social work research design. Then, in case we are evaluating an intervention, then we would gather baseline data or pre-intervention measurement of the situation. We introduce an intervention and then we assess the intervention impact or the effects. And that is how, when we compare the pre-intervention and the post-intervention effect, we are able to understand the impact, the efficacy or the lack of efficacy of the intervention that we are proposing or that we are using. Now, if we look at the entire research process, you see all the steps within the research process. Like any other research process, we also take the same steps. The first step, of course, in the research process is formulating a research problem. Formulating a research problem, let me just read out the steps and then we will go from one step to the other. The second step, of course, is that from this broad research problem or the research topic, we try and create research questions so that our research becomes doable, achievable, researchable. The third step is, of course, review of literature. One thing that I would want to say is that, this kind of a presentation makes it appear as if all of these steps are chronological and they are mutually exclusive. I just want to say that they are not. You see, for example, literature review will span all the other steps. You can identify a broad research problem and then look at literature to see what exists, what is being done, what is a gap, what is not there. So review of literature again would span all the steps within the research process. Then, of course, based on the research intent or the research objective and the nature of research, we would also conceptualize a research design. That is the fourth step. Once we are able to conceptualize the research design, we will write or prepare a research proposal, which is like a blueprint of the entire research process that we will be assuming, we will be taking up for conduction of our research. Then we will go on to data collection, which has its multiple sub-steps woven in between, then gathering data, processing data, and ultimately it ends with the writing of a research report, but it also doesn't end there because the research report is just the beginning of application. And like I said, application of research in practice is the ultimate goal of social work research work. Now, if we look at the first step, which is essentially formulating a research problem, this in itself is a huge first step, because you begin with a very broad area of study. You take up a broad area of study, and how do you decide this broad area of study? The broad area of study can be contemplated or decided based on your motivation, your personal interest, your aptitude, and most importantly on the practice, right? The practice domain in which you work. So practice requirements also determine the broad area of research work that social workers and practitioners will take up or will propose for social work research. Of course, when we formulate research problem, reviewing the literature becomes very, very important. Because you see, one would like to know what is there, what is the theory which exists, what is the empirical research work which has been undertaken in this particular domain in which we want to study. Why do we review literature? We review literature because, number one, we want to understand our research problem and our research area well. We want to bring clarity and focus to what we wish to achieve through our research work. We also want to understand the theoretical framework or the theoretical premises on which we can base our research work. This is very, very critical. You see, a lot of times research work is undertaken without any kind of a theoretical underpinning or any kind of a theoretical framework. This kind of a research will tend to just, kind of wander and not be focused or specific, and will also not really contribute to theory building or to practical application. So providing a theoretical background and understanding and formulating a theoretical framework becomes very, very important to our study, and for that reviewing literature is important. Improving the research methodology, which means that you see, by looking at the other researches which have been undertaken, we can also fine-tune our own research methodology. It is very important to spend some time before we undertake research on, validating the methodological basis of the research work that we wish to undertake, because it will only save a lot of time later on. Fourthly, of course, broadening the knowledge base in the research area, because unless we know what is, we cannot really look for what we want to do or what we wish to do. Establishing links between what has been proposed to examine and what has already been studied. Like I said, that we should look for what has not been studied, or what needs to be verified, or what more aspects or dimensions need to be substantiated to what exists. Or, so in other words, we could also look at the gaps within the existing body of knowledge and empirical research work that is available, and that could contribute, that would make our research work more relevant, right, to the context in which the research work is undertaken. And finally, of course, for contextualizing the findings, because you may find that there is a research work which has been undertaken in a foreign context, right? But probably if the same research work is repeated in the Indian context, it may or may not lead to the same results, but you would still wish to know what has been done in other contexts. So contextualizing the findings also becomes important. When we formulate the research problem, of course, what forms the basis of this research problem is the question that we want answered, the assumption or the assertion that we want to challenge, or the the investigation that we wish to undertake. That, in other words, becomes our research problem. And the sources of research problem, of course, can stem from people, problems, programs, phenomena, interventions, etc. What are the considerations in selecting a research problem? Like I said, it could be choice, it could be our interest in a particular area of work, it could be motivation, it could be practice considerations. A lot of times we choose areas which challenge us. A lot of times we choose areas where we feel that work needs to be undertaken to strengthen practice, because in social work research we have many practice domains which are emerging domains, where maybe research is available, but research from the perspective of social work practice is not available. So again, that also challenges us to choose that particular area as our research basis. Magnitude, sometimes the magnitude of problems which exist also tempt us to select that particular area or domain as the basis of our research work. Concepts, we need to see which concepts are there. Measuring concepts is again difficult. Measurement of concepts in social research is a difficult proposition, but concepts, certain concepts that we wish to study can also form the basis of selecting a particular research problem. Our own level of expertise. For example, if I have an expertise in ecology or health or education, then as a practitioner also that level of expertise or the area of expertise may motivate me to undertake research in a particular domain. Relevance for practice, like I said, that is the most critical parameter which defines the research problem. Availability of data. Ethical issues. I'd like to just dwell on the ethical issues in social work research and in social research on the whole, because many a times we tend to undermine or totally neglect the ethics in social research. Ethical questions pertaining to confidentiality, pertaining to consent, pertaining to hiding information or not revealing appropriate information to our subjects of the study. These are all becoming very critical. I think we can have one full lecture on ethics in social research and ethics in social work research, but it is now our endeavor to focus on ethical research work, where our subjects, where our clients know that they are subjects for research. We take written consent, we take consent from, we also have ethics committees through which research work needs to go, so that we are sure that our research work will not harm our subjects, it will not harm our participants. So ethical issues, certain areas or themes where ethical issues cannot be kind of accommodated, would not be good themes for research work. So ethical issues also will play a very important role in the choice of our research domain. What are the steps in selecting research problems? Of course, the number one step is, first we will identify a broad field or subject area. Then we will divide this broad area into sub areas, which are more, you see, operational areas, selecting the sub area of interest, raising research questions. The whole theme or the topic of research then needs to be broken down into researchable questions which can guide our research work. Then we will need to formulate objectives based on our research questions. We need to assess these objectives. We need to also recheck our objectives. Formulation of objectives, I don't need to really go into this, but as you all know that you have this concept of SMART objectives. SMART objectives are defined as those objectives which are specific or very focused, which are measurable, which are achievable, which are result focused, and which are time bound. You see, it's very important to dwell on the research objectives, because sometimes the fallacy or the error that we commit is that we have a whole list of very ambitious objectives, and we assume or we kind of propose those objectives because we want our research to be very phenomenal and very extraordinary. But when we really set out to do research work, we find that they really don't lead to anything concrete. And in that sense, especially in context of social work research, we need to have very specific objectives which can lead to, like I said, an enhancement or a facilitation to the practice endeavors that we engage with. After we have identified or we have formulated our research problem, the next part is, of course, hypothesis formulation. Now, hypothesis is not required for exploratory studies. Hypothesis is usually formulated in the case of descriptive studies and other categories of studies. What is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a tentative proposition whose validity is unknown. In most cases, the hypothesis specifies a relationship between two or more variables. It provides theoretical background to the study. What are the characteristics of the hypothesis? And we could set one hypothesis or more than one hypothesis. It should be simple, specific, and conceptually clear. It should be capable of being verified and tested. Sorry. It should be related to the existing body of knowledge, and it should be operationalizable. What are the sources of our hypothesis? The sources of hypothesis are, of course, the body of literature that is available, the findings of other research studies, the body of theory which exists, personal experiences, socialization process, and learning experiences. The next step is, of course, conceptualizing a research design. This is also a very, very important step in the entire research process. What is a research design? The research design is basically an arrangement of conditions for the collection and analysis of data in a manner that aims to combine relevance to the research purpose with economy in procedure. It's very, very important. These are the two main thrust areas. That is, one is that whatever research we undertake should lead to the fulfillment of our research purpose or research objectives, and secondly, it should lead to economy in procedure. That means we should not be wasting unnecessary time in exploring things which do not fall under the domain of our research objectives. We should not be wasting money, resources, manpower. So what is, so a research design is intended to focus on both of these things, that we remain relevant to our research objectives and we also economize to the extent that is possible. And this research design enables us to undertake our research logically, systematically, so that we are able to answer all our research questions validly, objectively, accurately, and economically. So that, I guess, summarizes the whole idea and the whole purpose and the whole nature of the research design. And it is important to propose a research design before we proceed with the further steps of the research process. In other words, the research design is like a blueprint for undertaking the entire process of research. If I just wish to very briefly capture what all is included in a research design, then a research design will include things like, number one, what is this study all about? Or what is this research about? Why is this research being undertaken? Where, you see, which is the scope of the study. Where will the research work be undertaken? What type of data is required? Where can this data be found? What periods of time will the study include? What will be the sample design? What methods and tools of data collection will be used? How will the data be analyzed? In what style will the report be prepared? And also how this data will permeate, will facilitate, will aid practice. So significance for social work is also very, very important component of the research design that we propose. Now, when we conceptualize a research design, of course, it will have a very clear statement of the research problem. It will have very clearly, it will stipulate the procedures and the techniques that we will be using in order to gather information for fulfilling our research objectives. It will also very clearly state the population which will be studied and the methods which will be used to gather, process and analyze the data. What are the factors to be considered? I mean, how will we select a research design? Number one, of course, what are our research objectives? That will determine. So if it is exploratory, if we are gathering new insights, then it will be exploratory research design. If we are describing a phenomenon, then it will be a descriptive research design. If we are testing a causal relationship, it will be an experimental or a quasi-experimental research design. Then, of course, the nature of the research problem that we are proposing to study, what are the means of obtaining information. Also, it's very important to see what kind of time is available to us. You see, if it is a small research study, then we will have to plan our research work accordingly. So the availability of resources by way of time, by way of money, by way of manpower that is available to undertake research, that will also determine the nature of the research design that we select. And of course, the availability and skills of the researcher and the research team. That's very important. For example, qualitative research, it requires distinctly, much greater expertise in terms of data, not only data collection but also data analysis. Analysis of qualitative data requires an expertise, and not everybody who's untrained in qualitative research can do that. So of course the availability and the skills of the researcher and his team also play a very important role in determining the nature of the research design. Now let me just look at 2 or 3 important types of research design that are operational in the domain of social work research. One, of course, is experimental research design. Here, like I said, that these are studies where relationships between variables are studied, cause-effect relationships are studied. There we usually use experimental research design, and experimental research designs are also of multiple types. I'm not going into that. We have the after only, before after, longitudinal, cross-sectional, ex post facto. So different types of research designs depending on what is the nature of the research work, or what is the nature of relationship, or what our variables are. Within experimental research designs, of course, you have an independent variable and you have a dependent variable, and you would want to see what is the impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Definitely, like I said first, that control has to be established, because if you do not establish control, then you will not be able to conclusively say that A has caused B, because there may be C, D, E, F also which are contributing to B. So situation of control is mandated in an experimental research designs. Experimental model is appropriate when we test hypothesis or hypothesis testing. So this is a distinct category of research work that we undertake using the experimental research design. We also have what is called the quasi-experimental research design. Now, in the domain of social work and social research also, like I said, conditions for control are difficult to establish. Sometimes we may not have this optimal controlled environment. So we can use quasi-experimental design to select groups on which we can test our variables without any kind of random pre-selection processes which are important in the experimental research design. For example, I've just taken an example. Let's say we want to perform an educational experiment. We want to see whether one type of teaching pedagogy is more effective when we are working with special children as compared to another one. We can just divide a class of special children by alphabetical selection or by seating arrangement, you see. So there is no random pre-selection process. You don't really create any kind of specialized groups to study the intervention. The division is often convenient, and especially in an educational situation causes as little disruption as is possible. Then we have a whole category of research designs which are non-experimental. Here I am just proposing two. One is the exploratory research design and the other is a descriptive research design. The exploratory research studies, like I said, are also called formulative research studies, and the main purpose of these studies is to generate new knowledge, to clarify certain issues, to uncover variables which have been hitherto unknown, to formulate problems for, you may have problems which are unexplored, relatively little explored. So you would formulate them for more precise investigation under this whole category of exploratory research design, and sometimes developing working hypotheses from an operational point of view. The next set of research designs is of course called the descriptive research design. This is the most commonly used research design in social research and social work research. These are studies which are concerned with describing characteristics of particular individuals, groups, situation or phenomenon, substantiating to what is already known. These studies are concerned with predictions, with narration of facts, with characteristics concerning our individual clients, our groups, our constituencies, our communities, situations. In descriptive studies, the researcher must be able to define clearly what he wants to measure and must find adequate methods for measuring it, along with a clear-cut definition of the population that the researcher wants to study. If I compare exploratory and descriptive research designs, exploratory research designs are much more flexible. They are flexible because they have to constantly accommodate new data, new sets of data. So they have to be flexible. The methods, the tools, everything that we engage in exploratory research is flexible. In the case of descriptive research designs, we have more rigid. We have a greater element of rigidity, and we have a greater level of structuredness to the different steps and to the different components of our research process. Now, after we have selected our research design, we will, the next step is of course data collection, or sourcing the data which will answer our research questions. A lot of times, of course, we have to rely on sampling, because we cannot cover the entire universe or the entire population. In those studies where we cover the entire population, we call them census studies. But in the domain of research work, most of the time we use sampling. We select a sample, and I'm sure all of you know what is sampling, but just to iterate or reiterate, sampling is the process of selecting a few or a sample from a bigger group, which is the universe or the population, to become the basis for estimating or predicting the prevalence of an unknown piece of information, situation or outcome regarding the bigger group. The sample is a subgroup of the population that the researcher is interested in. It can be defined as that part of statistical practice which is concerned with the selection of a subset of individual observations within a population of individuals intended to yield some knowledge about the population of concern. So what basically we are trying to do is, we are trying to select a subset of units from the larger universe to ensure that there is some representativeness, and the results that we are able to generate by studying this small subset of units can be extrapolated for the entire universe, can be generalized for the entire population that we are studying. Types of studying, again, in social research and in social work research, we rely more on non-probability type of sampling. You all know that there are two categories or two types of sampling. One is of course the probability type of sampling, and the other is the non-probability type of sampling, and both of them are relied upon in case of social research and social work research. For a sampling designed to be called random or probability sampling, each element of the sample should have an equal and independent chance of being selected, right? So that means we follow the theory of probability in the probability type of sampling, and there are various types of probability sampling. You have the simple random sampling, which can be just performed using a lottery method or tables. You have systematic sampling, we have stratified random sampling, we have multi-stage and cluster sampling. In social work research, all of these are used. We use multiple stage and cluster sampling also to a great extent. Then, like I said, we use non-probability type of sampling. Unlike what most people believe, non-probability type of sampling is also very, you see, it yields very good results, and it is something, I mean, a lot of us think that non-probability type of sampling should not be used, but there is an increasing focus on using non-probability type of sampling because it gives the type of results that we need in our area of research. Non-probability type of sampling do not follow these type of techniques do not follow any theory of probability. They are used. When do we use non-probability type of sampling? We use this when the number of elements, the total number of elements within the population are unknown, or they are not individually identified. What are the different types of non-probability sampling? We all use these. We use purposive or judgmental sampling, we use quota sampling, we use snowball sampling, we use accidental sampling or convenience sampling, and these all are increasingly now being used in social work research. Coming to data collection, of course, there are two major sources of data. We all know that one is, of course, the secondary data. This is based on what is already available, what exists. And so we look at the various documentary sources to procure the data that is already available. An array of documents can be looked at. Then, of course, we have the primary sources of data collection. Primary sources are used to access fresh data, new data which is not existing already, right? And of course, within the primary sources, you have methods which can be used to tap primary sources. Here I am just looking at two main methods. Of course, we have multiple methods. One is, of course, observation that we use, and the other is interviewing. Based observation is of two types. One is the participant observation, and we have the non-participant observation. In social research, we use both. Of course, participant observation is a very difficult proposition because it entails, you see, our living with our subjects in their context, sometimes even assuming the activities and the life and the lifestyle of our subjects. But in anthropology and sociology, there is a great reliance on using participant observation. The other is, of course, non-participant observation. Many researchers use non-participant observation in the domain of social work research. Interviewing, again, it can be individual interviewing, it can be group interviewing, it can be structured, it can be semi-structured. So you have different types of interviewing. Within interviewing also, you can rely on different tools. For example, you can have interview guides, you can have interview schedules, you can have questionnaires. All these are the different tools which are based on using interview as a method of data collection. Then of course I have not focused so much on qualitative research because I think that can form a sequel to this particular lecture in another series, but I'd still like to just mention a few methods that we rely upon in qualitative research, again because we are increasingly using you see qualitative research in our kind of research. So you have in-depth interviews, you have focused group discussions, you have narratives, oral histories, life history, you have ethnography, all of these grounded theories, so multiple methods of qualitative research. I also wish to point out the relevance of using case study as a research method in social work, because it enables us to get in-depth qualitative information about a single unit, and which helps us to really understand the larger population or the larger universe that, or the larger phenomena that we are proposing to investigate. Then of course the next step is, after we have gathered data, we will then come to processing of data. That means we are converting the raw data into data which can be analyzed and from which conclusions and recommendations can be drawn. So of course raw data has to be first edited. That means it has to be scrutinized very, very carefully for errors and omissions. We have to ensure that the data is complete in every respect. It is valid, reliable data that is then put across for processing. This is followed by coding. Coding is assigning numericals or assigning symbols to the data so that our data becomes amenable to processing. It becomes amenable to classification, it becomes amenable to tabulation in case we are undertaking a quantitative analysis of data. So some kind of a coding, you see coding again would depend on the nature of research work. Sometimes when we are using tools, our tools have both closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. When we have closed-ended questions, classification, coding and classification becomes easy, because we have distinct categories which can be drawn up even before we undertake data collection. But when we have open-ended categories, then it becomes very difficult, because then we have to go through all the responses, and after we have done a scrutiny of all the responses, then we classify responsive into certain distinct categories which we are able to identify post data collection. So coding is undertaken. After we undertake coding, we tabulate our data, and after tabulating data, we look at analysis, which is of course the most important component of any research process. Analysis is undertaken, and on the basis of analysis, one would formulate the conclusions, the suggestions and the recommendations of research work. Of course, in today's context, you see, when we were students, we used to rely on manual processing and manual analysis of data, but now we have computer aided data analysis, and you all know about the quantitative data analysis programs that are available, SPSS, SAS, STATA. Qualitative data, these are very, very interesting softwares that are there to help us, because like I said, qualitative data is difficult not only to gather, it's also very difficult to analyze. And Atlas TI, NVivo, CoDA Minor, these are all very, very important softwares which have made the whole exercise of data analysis easier to write. And then of course the last is writing the research report. Just to read out, it means preparing an outline of the report, assembling data, preparing tables and graphs, writing the body of report, writing conclusions and future, you see, applications of the research work, an executive summary, acknowledgements, and of course completion and finalization of the report.
Okay, so
that is all.
So this is an overview of whole research process in the social work, and we are also running short of time, so we conclude. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. Neera Agnimitra for giving such an insightful and a wonderful lecture on this very topic. The topic was complex, but she very in simple language very simplified the things and made us to understand this topic. Thank you very much.